So I want to take a brief detour from power and influence to talking about empowering, which in many ways is somewhat the opposite of power and influence. In other words, it's when people that have power and are capable of influencing use that power and influence to empower the employees to make the decisions themselves. So empowerment is defined as a process in which employees are given increasing amounts of autonomy and discretion in connection to their work. So it's basically how much power is being given back to the workers from those that have that position power to influence, to allow the employees themselves to influence. And it basically varies from an entire spectrum of none at all, so no empowerment. Workers are not free to make any decisions about how to do their job. They are completely being influenced by those with power, all the way to basically total power, total empowerment. Workers are free to do their jobs exactly as they wish, to set up their own hours, to set up their own goals, and to make sure they're attaining those goals. As long as they are within the organization's broader mission, it's acceptable. So you can kind of see how power locks into this, because in one situation, no empowerment, the need for management to use power to influence is very, very high. While in the other situation, the need to actually exert power and influence is very, very low, because that power and influence has actually been empowered to the employees themselves. So a lot of research has found that generally an empowering climate, especially in a lot of white collar jobs or more skill intensive jobs, actually results in a lot of positive outcomes. So a lot of organizations have tried to come up with systems which encourage those with power, legitimate power within the organization, to yield some of that power to empower their actual employees. So some of the things that can create the climate that allows empowerment includes information sharing, autonomy, and accountability. So basically, information sharing, making sure, remember one of the things we talked about as far as sources of power, one of those was informational power. So making sure that that power is no longer being held by those in higher positions, that the information is freely available and freely shared amongst all of the actual employees. Autonomy, so the employees have the ability to make their own choices and to work without constantly checking with upper management, but also accountability, that they're expected to be performing and basically attaining organizational goals through their use of information and their autonomy. So all of this results in an empowering climate. And the empowering climate basically has three main outcomes. One, it does find people that are empowered tend to have an enhanced individual performance. So we see an increase in performance in empowering climates. We also see an enhanced job satisfaction. And more importantly, we see enhanced team performance. So in organizations that do not empower their employees, we usually find lower individual performance, less successful teams, and lower job satisfaction. So there is a solid metric that organizations can look at that basically encourages them to think about how they can set up empowerment. In other words, how to spread power from the top of the organization through successfully to all the levels of the organization. So we also have to think about the group or subunit power. So power within organizations tend to be distributed unequally across different departments or subunits. So we're going to talk about two broad theories about this: resource dependency model and strategic contingency model. But again, we need to recognize that when we're empowering an organization, that there will be differences between certain groups and certain subunits and how much power we can distribute. And you can think about this if you're actually talking about employees on an assembly line. There are ways to empower those assembly workers, but at the end of the day, their jobs are fairly static. There's not a whole lot you can do compared to maybe the autonomy that you could give marketing or you could give HR. So we do need to recognize this and also consider what the impacts of that's going to be in an organization. So let's talk about these two theories that kind of predict how group or subunit power is distributed in an organization. So the resource dependency model is the view that power resides within subunits that are able to control the greatest share of valued organizational resources. So for example, the more important the resource and the more control that group has, the more overall power that they will have as a group. So you can think of, important resources, accounting, marketing, and production, and unimportant resources. So marketing might have access to both unimportant and important. Production might have access to both. However, accounting may only have access to important resources. For example, control of the actual money. So the resource dependency model says that if you're looking for areas or subunits or groups that may have more power And we're not talking about individual power now, we're talking about group or team power. Look for those that have the control of the most resources. That's where you're going to find the greatest amount of power. And groups that have the least amount of power or control over resources will tend to have the least amount of power. Strategic contingency model is a view examining power in terms of a subunit's capacity to control the activities of other subunits. So this is less about control, about controlling resources or having control of resources, and more about where does the group or subgroup lie in the command structure. So basically, the idea here is that groups that can reduce uncertainty, are in a central position, tend to be indispensable, tend to also have more power within an organization. So if your role or your group or subgroups or team's role is to reduce uncertainty, in other words, if your focus is on risk assessment and helping other groups within the organization reduce that uncertainty, that is going to result in having more power. The more central position you have within an organization, in other words, the more other groups come to you for help, the more power you're going to have. And also if you're indispensable, in other words, there's not another group that could be doing your role. So management would often be in this role. So their job is to provide resources, reduce uncertainty. They're fairly central. Everyone's reporting to a management structure, and it would be hard to remove them completely from an organization, though the group of managers may be larger than the organization needs. Lawyers, legal, and a power company, for instance, but also consultants, all of these may also fall into this pattern. So this was a fairly short module, so hopefully you got a chance to take a break, that you only had to listen to this for a few minutes. However, it really is an interesting concept of thinking about how we can take what we learned about power and influence and spread it through an organization, empowering, but also some of the challenges to that empowering that we need to be aware of and to watch for while we're doing it, and recognize that they may have some impact as well. So obviously, if we were looking at either the strategic contingency model or the resource model, both of those would predict certain groups are going to naturally accumulate more power and influence, which means they also will tend to have higher job satisfaction, higher performance, and higher team performance. And certain groups may actually be lacking in power under these models. And again, we probably would want to spend extra amount of attention kind of looking at how do we also come up with other ways to affect their performance and job satisfaction, as their natural position within the power structure may not be resulting in that kind of an outcome. As always, if you have some questions, feel free to use the discussion board on Canvas, and I'll talk to you in the next module.